So Dr. Kulshrestha, I would like to ask you, like, it's like floods is in the sense that we've had them since time immemorial. Like, it's a common feature in our country. And why is it that still we have not been able to decrease the vulnerability of the community to the floods?
Yes, that's a very good question, why we have not been able to do. I think, personally, I feel that the basic reason is that increasing population, the large pressure of population in the floodplains. See, again, as I was mentioning a little while earlier, traditionally, the civilizations have grown on the coast or on the river banks. And again, the river banks or the floodplains of rivers, these are highly fertile, where a lot of, thing can be grown. Added to that is the latest problem where the poor people, they migrate to the cities. And the only place where they find that nobody is going to ask them to get out is in the river banks and the floodplains. And they put their jhopparpattis, the jhuggi jhopparis and that sort of clusters, they do come there. And the first time when it is there, then you get the flood. Now, again, the pressure on the land, the construction, the soaking power of the earth, we have decreased, so to say, because everything is paved in the cities, roads and the footpaths are paved. There is no place where the water can get in, so all the water that flows. And we have a large amount of rainfall. We are a monsoon country. So there is a lot of water available. After all, what is flood? Flood is the water that is coming either from the snow melt in the rivers or due to rain, which the normal channels are not able to take it along. And then it is spread sideways, that is flood. So we are decreasing the soaking power, we are constructing more buildings, we are coming in a vulnerable area and establishing activities there, people are living, and this all leads to a flood. And India is one of the most flood prone areas, and as you rightly said, it seems that the flood type of problems are increasing. And added to that is the drainage problem. Drainage problem, right. You can say waterlogging problem.
See, normally it is said that the naturally occurring flash river and coastal flooding from intense rainfall or inundation associated with seasonal weather patterns, these are the causal phenomenon so far as the flood is concerned. You were talking of the human settlements, and do we not mean to add on to here that the human manipulation of watersheds, the drainage basins and the floodplains is also one of the important reasons which is coming in the way for causing the floods?
Definitely. I mean, human settlements, but apart from that, it's a deforestation.
Yeah.
See, forests are getting removed, and with the result that the holding power of the earth soil is decreased. The soil itself gets eroded. It's taken away. That's the reason. The catchment areas, and we are adding the anthropogenic reasons, that is the man-made reasons, definitely accentuate the problems due to floods. There's no doubt about it. But the floods, generally the floods, the riverine floods, that's what we mean. And the organized system in the country, because the whole arrangement for the flood forecasting is that the two agencies come into the picture. The Central Water Commission, CWC, and also the India Meteorological Department. Now the Meteorological Department gives the rainfall data. The Central Water Commission gives the flood forecast for the river stage, how much it is going to cross the danger mark or whatever it is. But the other type of thing, which the organized system does not seem to cater, are the small area floods. Say, for example, take in the mountainous areas or the flash floods. Suddenly there has been a downpour, what they call a cloud burst. Or what has happened is that somewhere in a mountainous area, a little obstacle, a pebble, a stone, some debris is blocking a normal stream. And that water collects. And suddenly when that is too much of water, this gives way and the whole thing comes down and the village is washed off and all that.
Well, sir, for my benefit, where you have been referring to the word flash flood.
Yes.
The moment we talk of the flash flood, do we mean to say over here that the accelerated rainfall or the breaking of ice jam or the dam failure, these are the ones which are causing the flash floods?
No. Flash flood, what I mean is that there are only two reasons, as I mentioned just now. Either there is a very intense localized rainfall, just what is called sometimes a cloud burst, as if the cloud has burst. So there's so much of water that it comes down cascading and then removes whatever comes on the way. The other thing is that there is a normally flowing stream and there is a rainfall taking place, and one pebble, one stone comes from somewhere hurtling and blocks it, so that the water starts collecting, a sort of a reservoir is formed there. And when this water is too much, this stone is broken or is removed, and the whole water comes cascading and then moves away. Generally small hamlets in the village and that type of thing is there. So in this particular case, there's no other way but the local system only has to work. That is, suppose there is a stream and suddenly the person finds that in that say the water has slowed down. Why it has slowed down? When it is raining. So somebody should go up and remove that little stone. That type of thing is done in the other countries also here, because the organized system for floods takes care of the riverine floods. But this time of small communities, they are not catered at the moment by, and probably they cannot be catered by a gross countrywide system.
And these river floods are usually seasonal in the river system. These are usually seasonal, mostly during the monsoon season or so.
Monsoon or even during summertime times when there a lot of snow melt is there, then they come.
And then we have also the coastal floods, which is there because of the cyclone.
The storm
surges which are there because of
Already,
that. Now, well, you were referring to the forecasting. Would you kindly throw some light on it, that how effective is this warning and the forecasting so far as the flood is concerned?
And also predictability.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, predictability is good because again, the flood is originated in terms of rainfall. And rainfall, since we know very well because we measure the rainfall, and then there are methods that is measured and it's available. What is done on the other side is how much will be the water coming. And that for each area, the local revenue officials, district officials or state officials, they fix a certain mark which is known as a danger mark. That is, if suppose the water comes up to this level, the water will be entering into the city, different parts and all that type of thing will be there. So then the warning is issued that now the water level is so much it is likely to be, because what happens, the water comes, it takes a little time to arrive and then it takes a little time to clear. That the peaking is a little later than, rain might have stopped, but then the peaking, that is the peak will arrive a little later. But there are methods, hydrological methods of calculating that, and the Central Water Commission does that and issues the flood forecast.
Well, so it means that we find that there is something which is definitely to be depended upon, but still one finds that too much of the loss is being suffered every year. This time, good part of the Uttar Pradesh was inundated in water, and we find it that those areas which are earlier drought prone, now we find that they are flood prone as well. There are the places which are having the flood as well as the drought which are going simultaneously. Now, in keeping with that, once we come on to our move little later, more at length onto this, and we refer to the factors which do contribute to the vulnerability so far as the flooding is concerned. Of course, the first would be that is this location of settlements on floodplains. We have the example of Delhi also before us. Every year, whenever there is water in Yamuna, not many of the settlements, those get inundated, and there is a loss of property, loss of lives also, livestock at times, and so on and so forth. Maybe there are some, again, compelling economic reasons on the part of the people, those who are staying over there, that they are unable to come out of that kind of a thing. Then, of course, lack of awareness of flooding hazard, which is there another important aspect. Then reduction of absorptive capacity of land, maybe because of the erosion and things like that. High risk infrastructural elements which have come up over there, and the fishing boats and maritime industry, unprotected food stocks and standing crops and livestock, etc., which are the most vulnerable kind of the thing so far as the flooding is concerned. One thing which I am little tempted to bring to your notice, learners over here, is that Dr. Kulshrestha was talking of some of the agencies which are involved so far as the flooding is concerned. Obviously, one finds that one of the important lead agencies on the from the government side which is there is this irrigation. Then the revenue, the police and the medical services, which are to play an important role when there is a flood. Before the flood as well as after the flood, when we talk of the land use pattern, of course we find the role of the revenue department in a big way. Once we talk of the cropping and the other kind of the things which need to be there, you were talking, Dr. Kulshrestha, of the deforestation over here, then this brings in the role of the agriculture department at the government level, and the deputy director agriculture, then the block level extension officers of the departments of agriculture in the state, which have to play an important role. Then the role which is to be played by the state electricity board, because there could be electrocution, another casualty adding aspect which could be there as a result of the flood. So there comes the role of the electricity department or the electricity board in a given state. Then the role of the police, because once such kind of a thing takes place, the people, those are already affected, by the hazard which is known as the flooding, and then some of the goods which are there, those goods are being stolen by people or things like that, the role of the police is there. Then keeping this in view, and then of course in a big way, because when such kind of the hazard takes place, we find that there is every possibility of the epidemic. So there is the role of the health department and the public health department as well in order to stop about the contamination. Water supply and sewerage board again has to play an important role over there. In keeping Dr. Kulshrestha, the point which I was making was that when we find that there are so many lead agencies, I don't mean to say over here even for a single second that they have not been performing their task, that when they are performing their task in a big way, then what are the factors, possibly a couple of it or one single factor, which is unable to bring the results as desired? What is it? Is it the poor coordination?
No. Before I come to answer your specific question, let me add one more most important agency to these, and that is our defense services.
Yeah.
See, in case of any disaster, particularly floods, they are very often called upon to assist the civil authorities. When things go out of hand and the civil authorities, because of the enormity of the situation or because of the lack of the required resources at that time, boats and things of that type or whatever is there, or personnel even, you see, the defense services are called upon and they have been doing a marvelous job. In fact, marvelous, saying it marvelous is an understatement. The district magistrate in a district is officially authorized that if he so thinks, he can call upon the defense services to come to the rescue of the people and to assist the civilian arrangements that are being made. So I would like to not only mention the defense services but pay special tribute to what they have been doing year after year. Coming to your question that why there are problems. One problem basically is, which I mentioned in the beginning, is the increased activity, increased population. So that's one reason. Second reason, as I find, is that it all depends upon the amount of water coming in. Take the case of example of embankments. One of the flood protection measures, because first thing is protection and then comes the question of relief, rescue and things of that type. Now one of the common protection measures is building embankments. But if the water is more than that, and once the embankments give way, they break, it's a real catastrophe. Now the situation is very difficult. Should we not make embankments to protect ourselves? But once the embankment is giving way, what can be done at that stage except search and rescue? Now the great floods in 1993 in the American Midwest, the Mississippi area and all that, one of the, those who had seen those pictures on the TV, and they would recall that how the house is flowing, going away, the foundation is eroded and the house itself is floating and all that type of thing, embankments giving way. So the problem about the flood basically is how enormous is the flood and how you can create some place for the water to go. And meanwhile, protect the people, evacuate them, see that there are no epidemics, see that they have the food, see that there is a relief and rescue. But again, all this is for the riverine things. But in the smaller communities, there are different types of problems. Problems are not that enormous, but those communities are more vulnerable. So I think that the flood problem, the flood disaster, has to be fought on two different scales. One are the riverine floods, for which there is a forecast system, for which there are all the enormities there. The other is smaller, vulnerable communities. Example is in the mountainous areas, where the communication, everything is lacking. So there the self-help and then plus the NGO help, plus the awareness, and all that is going to be of great help.
Could we have something like flood control? Maybe because of the dikes, because of the dams, because of this flood proofing, erosion control, channels, etc., etc.
Plus also some kind with reference to as a mitigation measure, flood planning zone, something which
yes,
Dr. Sawhney was also mentioning about floodplain zoning when we were talking about cyclones.
Yes, floodplain zoning is a very important tool, but the main thing is that how in the floodplains Just as we were talking cyclones, how can you ensure that there can be a regulation that this type of activity should be there, people should not build vulnerable houses and all that, but these things are easier said than done. In any city you go and see, you find that what are the clusters coming up in the floodplains areas there. So floodplain zoning is very good, provided we can stop migration, provided we can stop all these things. These have got other socio-economic angles. So it's difficult. It should be done if it can be done, or to the extent it can be done.
No, but sir, I again would like to draw your attention onto the flood controlling. Is it possible? I mean, we have been trying to take some kind of the measures, maybe by way of dikes, maybe by way of channels, by way of dams, erosion control and flood proofing, etc., etc. So maybe we could control the severity of it to some extent.
Yes, but now there is a movement that people are against dams.
Empty dams.
Empty dams. You see, I mean, I do not know how that is to be done. Yes, dam. It's very difficult. So as I said, these are very complicated socio-economic, angles are
Yeah, that's right. And the damage which is caused on account of the floods, of course, other than the houses, it is on the personal belongings, livestock, crop and plantation, and the land and so on and so forth. Of course, there are specific demands which need to be raised for meeting with all these kind of the things. But there is the biggest thing is that the moment we talk of the human beings, see, it has its own importance and significance thereupon. That what is the impact of the flood at the family level? Maybe it separates the families. Maybe the persons are missing. Maybe the family is disorganized and so on and so forth, which has a possible kind of the impact of the flood onto it. But other than that, the moment we talk of it, that there is the impact, of course, there is the socio and economic consequences, there is the environmental consequences of the flood, and there is the family level consequences which are there. When we are talking of the flood in that great details, maybe we would also like to refer to over here some specific kind of the preparedness measures, some of which have been referred to earlier by Dr. Kulshrestha, which include like this flood detection and the warning system. The Central Water Commission is also playing its rather important role onto it, and I would like to share with learners over here that one of the former members of the Central Water Commission was associated so far as this course was concerned, and the unit of flood is being written by Mr. R. Rangachari, who happened to be the member of the Central Water Commission, and even now is being associated with number of the committees so far as the flood and the related aspects are concerned. Other than that is the community participation and education, which my colleague Alka was just referring to it, that probably this is something which is very common with regard to every particular disaster. Whatever we have to do, how we have to go ahead and so on, everywhere one feels that there is the role which is being played by the community, so there is need for the community education and awareness. And then the other thing is, of course, the development of the master plan for flood plan management, whereby we could be in position to do something better onto it. Dr. Kulshrestha, would you kindly like to speak something on the drainage?
Yes. Now, drainage or water logging, this is a problem which is coming up in a big way and is becoming more and more acute every day as I see it. Now, not only in terms of the flood in a river, where the drainage means outflow should be quicker and then the water can flow. So if the flood water comes and is drained off quickly, not much damage is done, provided no human being or property is caught that in area. In fact, the floods do bring in a lot of fertile soil, coming down from their sources or through the mountainous tract. Particularly most of our rivers originate in Himalayas or come through. So, but more than that, the water logging in the cities, now it is becoming an urban phenomena which is spoiling the life in the city in a very significant or an obnoxious way. Not only it stinks all around, the water is collected there, but now most of the places this water which is collected slowly goes into the water system underground, and most of the pumps that are available, particularly to the economically weaker sections where hand pumps have been put by the municipal authorities. Now these are shallow hand pumps, and most of these things comes, so it is a public health hazard. It leads to epidemic, say particularly in those areas, but otherwise also throughout, even during winter where there is not so much of a rain, etc., but water is has collected, and it's a common sight, it's stinking, black, dirty water. Houses are very good houses made, but there is no way to take off the water.
I was just referring to some of the typical post-disaster needs so far as this disaster, namely flood, is concerned. Of course, the first is the search and rescue, which is very important over here. Second is the medical assistance which needs to be provided to the people, those who have been inflicted. Then the disaster assessment, short-term supply of food and medicines, as well as the water, and the water purification, epidemiological surveillance, and the temporary shelter which needs to be provided. Obviously, we find that there are the units which are operative at the district headquarters everywhere, wherever there is the danger of the floods or there is a threat of the flood, and then those units are percolated down. Also, there is the help which is being provided by number of other agencies, whether those are military agencies or those are paramilitary forces and so on. So, combination of all these is there for the purpose of providing required kind of the assistance to the people. Again, I would like to submit over here also with regard to the impact assessment tools which are to be used or which are being used. One is this disaster survey form, and the other is the aerial surveys. We do see it on televisions, we do see it in the newspapers, the photos and all that, whereby the ministers and the officials, they are making the aerial surveys in order to see, but that is more of an eyewash. The real thing is also being done up through the aerial surveys, but those are not picturized the way we do get the pictures. But then certainly these are the assessment tools which are being used for making the assessment on count of the floods. Yeah, Dr. Kulshrestha, would you kindly like to speak something on the drainage?
Drainage or water logging becoming more and more acute every day as I see it. Now, not only in terms of the flood in a river, where the drainage means outflow should be quicker and then the water can flow. So if the flood water comes and is drained off quickly, not much damage is done, provided no human being or property is caught that in area. In fact, the floods do bring in a lot of fertile soil, coming down from their sources or through the mountainous tract. Particularly most of our rivers originate in Himalayas or come through. So, but more than that, the water logging in the cities, now it is becoming an urban phenomena which is spoiling the life in the city in a very significant or an obnoxious way. Not only it stinks all around, the water is collected there, but now most of the places this water which is collected slowly goes into the water system underground, and most of the pumps that are available, particularly to the economically weaker sections where hand pumps have been put by the municipal authorities. Now these are shallow hand pumps, and most of these things comes, so it's a public health hazard. It leads to epidemics, say particularly in those areas, but otherwise also throughout, even during winter where there is not so much of a rain, etc., but water is has collected, and it's a common sight, is stinking, black, dirty water. Houses are very good houses made, but there is no way to take off the water. People and the NGOs and the municipal authorities, they have to see to it that is wherever there is a water logging, I think some sort of this has to be done on a smaller scale, the water has got to be drained out. Mosquitoes, water going into the drinking water system through shallow hand pumps, any amount of things that you think of. This is something which is spoiling the health. It has long-term repercussions. The children's health is suffering, and I think this is something which has got to be urgently tackled. But I don't think this can be tackled on a national level by a sort of a gross level action. This has to be done at local action, and that will build up the picture for a national action. So there cannot be a national action plan, I think, for water logging in the cities, the urban phenomena, but this has to be tackled at the local community level, at the city level, town level.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kulshrestha. So we've just spoken about floods and drainage, and a very important thing that has come out of this discussion is that we have to fight floods at two levels, as Dr. Kulshrestha mentioned, at the riverine level and at the smaller level, that is in the mountains and where the vulnerable communities are there, where the government agencies and where cannot reach, and where the national level agencies cannot solve the problem. Over here, the NGOs and the local communities have to indulge in self-help and solve the problem. And he also talked about the fact that increasing population, deforestation is leading to the severity of floods, especially the embankments which also give away. We are not able to handle that problem. Now what we have been discussing, though these things are there, community has to be made aware of it. We have to proceed from a micro level to a macro level. We have to, like we were discussing with our listeners also during the break, that we have to start with the family level and then diversify into the community level and at a larger level, government level. Actually, government agencies have been trying very hard. They've also been coordinating amongst each other to provide relief measures and preventive steps. But it's a self-help which will actually help us in the end. So, Dr. Kulshrestha also talked about the drainage problem, which is causing a lot of menace to the public health system. So, this is something, these are the areas where we have to now divert our attention. And before we end our session, we will now take up drought and famine, which is also a very, very important disaster. And we witness it almost, it's a periodic occurrence in our country. And Dr. Kulshrestha will talk about the vulnerability of people to droughts, the predictability of droughts and famines, the mitigation measures that can be adopted. And foremost of it is the distinction between droughts and famine. So Dr. Kulshrestha, before we start, it would be better if you first clarify the distinction between droughts and famines.
Sir, before you take up, if I am to say over here that the immediate cause of the drought is deficit rainfall. It starts from that particular thing, and of course then there are some human induced changes which are there in the ground surface and the soil, which are again responsible for it, and then of course El Nino and the other things which are there. And maybe coupled with that is the increase of atmospheric carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases which is there. As a result of it, we find that there is the drought in the area. 20% of the total damage which is there, total loss out of all the disasters, that is being caused on account of the drought. So drought is, for that particular matter, it is having its own severity. So when you throw light onto it, please keep these things in consideration.
Sure. Now, as Madam Dhameja said, she wanted me to clarify first the distinction between drought and famine. I would say that drought may or may not lead to famine. Drought is, as Professor Sahni said, basically lack of rainfall. Now then, why two terms? Why drought and why famine? I'll give you the example of the great famine, the last famine that India faced, that was the Bengal. Now there was no dearth of grain in the country. Rainfall was good, it was not a deficient monsoon. It was the purchasing power of the people. So famine results from a lack of purchasing power of the people, or due to any other reason that one is not able to procure the grain which is already available. And the best that I can say, in a report that I wrote last year, a technical report 97 on drought management in India, I had quoted Professor Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, about whom we have been reading and whose welfare economics. He has a theory that famines do not occur in democracies. The reason is, if that stage comes when a section of the people, a large section of the people, does not have the wherewithal to procure the food. The people in a democracy, they will raise their voice. At other places, the people will raise the voice, and the government will be forced, whosoever are there, to rush food grain because food grain is available. And I think the proof of Professor Amartya Sen's theory, it comes that we have not had, say, a famine for last 30 or 35 years or so. I don't know why, almost 50 years, for more than 50 years now, half a century. Now, yes, small pockets of lack of rainfall may be there where there is hardship. It's the government's job, and they have been providing different types of Rozgar Yojana, certain other things are there where people are provided work, food for work, and that type of thing is there. So drought is basically a lack of rainfall and all the things resulting from it. There are three types of droughts, as you would have read in the booklet also: the meteorological drought, the hydrological drought, and the agricultural drought. Meteorological drought is lack of rainfall. So there is lack of water not only from the skies but maybe in the rivers also, and maybe in the moisture, on the ground. That is the hydrological drought. And when all this means that sufficient water is not available for the crops, you have the agricultural drought. But if the agricultural drought is on a large scale over the country, entire area such a large scale as we had, say, in some of the sub-Saharan countries of Africa, where there was no rainfall for a number of years, well, drought can lead to famine. Fortunately for us, our monsoon, which is the major rain giver for the country, for the agriculture of the country, for drinking water, for anything else, for industrial use of water, the monsoon is a fairly dependable friend of the country. Later or sooner, it does come, and then it never fails the entire country. That is on record. And at the moment, for last 10, 11 years, we are in a favorable phase of monsoon. So drought on a large scale, on the country or the state scale, we have not witnessed over last many decades.
So you feel, sir, that it is usually predictable and we could have the warnings in advance?
Yes, in the sense that, again going to the basic definition, that drought means lack of rain. Rain, if rain is predictable, then I would say the drought is predictable, because it's not one rain. Yeah. It's a question of over a prolonged period, over a large area, maybe more than one. Say, for example, the last time that you could say we had was in 1986 and 87, 2 consecutive years of deficient rainfall, deficient monsoon. And since for the annual rainfall, monsoon is about 80% of the annual rainfall of the country on the average. And so that's the main thing. In fact, that's the main growing season also. The Rabi depends entirely on that. The Kharif also depends on that. Kharif basically depends on the monsoon. So we have the drought is predictable in the sense that we can predict the rainfall, we can predict monsoon. Of late, we have been predicting monsoon correctly. Our scientists have been predicting correctly for last so many years. That is on the average basis.
So, in keeping with what Dr. Kulshrestha was just referring to with regard to predictability or the warning system for the drought, or to meet the challenge which is there to be faced by the people and in the target areas as such, one has to come down to the factors which contribute to the vulnerability so far as the drought is concerned. Maybe location in arid areas where dry conditions are increased by drought, the farming on marginal lands, then subsistence farming, lack of agriculture inputs to improve the yields, lack of seed reserves, areas dependent on other weather systems for water resources, areas of low soil moisture retention, and lack of recognition and allocation of resources to drought hazard. One finds that good amount of our area in the country, it is drought prone. The government started long back about the DPAP, Drought Prone Area Program, in order to give to the people a kind of assistance and also to induce that kind of the changes in the area which are required to cope with the challenges emanating out of the droughts. What could possibly be the typical adverse effects of the drought, which include, of course, the first thing is reduced income for farmers. When Dr. Kulshrestha was referring to the comparisons or the distinction between drought and famine, he said that famine is not possible to be there as per Amartya Sen in the democratic systems, because the government shall have to come into being. It is related more to the economic cause. Amartya Sen also had said it over there that the grains were available in the big way, but we were not able to have it, and consequently there was a famine because there was a poor coordination. No coordination as well, that what the government agencies were doing. We have seen it in the country as well. When in the recent times, we had been purchasing the onions for that matter at 45 rupees a kilo. When we had found it that, well, for 1000 grams of the salt was being sold in Delhi for at as high a price as 45 rupees. So that means that the government did come into action, and so we were saved of it. Otherwise, we could have probably been in line to such kind of the tragedy or the casualty again on that count. So this has a correlation with this income, that there is a reduced income for the farmers, which is a typical adverse effect, because they are dependent upon the agriculture yield, and when the crop gets affected, definitely they cannot have the yield out of it, and so there is a income reduction is there. Then other thing is reduction of spending from agriculture sector, increase in prices of staple food, which is causing upon each and every person. Other than that of the farming community, it is causing its effects upon each and every aspect. I again would like to reiterate over here that every disaster for that matter has a direct as well as an indirect effect or the impact. So one has to take into consideration from both the scales as such. Then increased inflation rates, deterioration of nutritional status, famine, illness, death, reduction of drinking water resources, migration, the breakup of communities, loss of livestock, etc., which are some of the reasons. So when we take these aspects into consideration, do we not mean that some kind of alternate cropping pattern needs to be developed in order to cope with the challenges which are emanating out of drought? That if these are the typical adverse effect, and we say that it is basically the crop which gets affected onto it, though the loss of the human beings is not there, as it is there in case of flood or earthquake or cyclone. We do not find that there is loss of the human life so far as drought is concerned, but it has its direct impact upon the economic activity and then consequently upon the social activities as well. So do we not mean to have it over here for consideration, that why should we not have an alternate cropping pattern strategy?
I would like to put that in a little broader perspective and covering your point, but before that let me just make a mention of a few more characteristics of droughts. So for example, drought, just as we said that earthquake or cyclone, earthquake is a sudden onset, cyclone not so sudden, we have at least 2 or 3 days of warning available. Drought is a long, it takes long time, we don't know, it is a no sharp start. There could be a sharp end to a drought, a prolonged drought. Suddenly there is a good rain, a cyclone, a depression moving there. But the start, we do not know where a drought starts. It creeps on the system. It's a creeping type of thing. Second thing, it affects a large area. It's not a small area like a cyclone affected area or an earthquake affected area or even a flood affected area. It's a larger area. Second thing is about the death. We do not come to know in case of drought is because most of the people, they migrate to their places. Either they have relations or they go in search of something. Even the cattle, they migrate with their cattle and that type of thing. But the health that suffers because there are so many diseases that come because of the lack of water, because water is not only absolutely essential, it cleanses the system. So if you have lack of water, there can be many problems that are coming in there. Given that, the question of you raised the question of, so we must keep these characteristics in mind when we talk of drought in any of its impacts or in any of its manifestations. Coming to you talked of the alternate cropping pattern. I would put it this way, that the drought prone areas in our country can also be given another name, and that name shall we give for the time being the rain fed areas. That is, these are those areas where there is no alternate arrangement for irrigation apart from the naturally occurring rain. Wherever there is irrigation facilities are available, it can be done. It could be a canal irrigation, it could be by the side of a river, or it could even be the place where underground water is available at a fairly decent depth, and then there are facilities of pumps and the diesel or the electric supply available to pump that water out. Although we have talked earlier in the earlier session about the dangers of indiscriminate extracting of water from underground sources. So these rain-fed areas which depend entirely on the rain, and while we say that monsoon is a good friend of the country, but it is also a very, shall I say, a moody friend, in the sense that the variability of monsoon rainfall, both in time and space, is notorious. It doesn't rain the same amount at the same place in every season or even within the season. It varies over the time, it varies over space, and so when the rain-fed areas get caught in this moodiness of the monsoon or moodiness of the rain systems over the country, there is trouble. Now for that purpose, it becomes very important to tackle these rain-fed areas. Another important aspect of these rain-fed areas of the country is that they constitute about 60%, 60% of the total arable land of the country. That is the area which is either under agriculture or can be under agriculture. 60% of that, majority of that is rain-fed, where there is no availability of irrigation and there is no present immediate hope of getting irrigation extended to those areas. But this 60% of the arable area of the country even now gives 40% of the grain production for the country. And if we have to feed our population, increasing population, as recently it was said that we have to increase our grain production from about 20 crore tons, that is 200 million tons at present, or a little less than 200 million tons, double it in next 10 years or so, a tall order. We have to depend on this rain-fed area. That is what we also could call a drought-prone area. Now that brings in a whole lot of, technology there. The seeds, if any fertilizers, if at all, whatever are there, cropping patterns, the whole agricultural technology. And I'm glad to say that the agricultural scientists of the country who have given us the green revolution and which has fed this population, say in 60s, early 60s or late 50s, we know that we were living on the grain imported. Since then, the population has more than doubled, and still, people are being fed. This is due to the agricultural scientists and the farmers who made the green revolution possible. I think we are on the threshold, or we should have a green revolution for these so-called rain-fed areas or drought-prone areas, and they are important, and therefore the monitoring the rainfall in those areas, monitoring the climate of those areas, for each specific area having the alternate cropping patterns, seeds or whatever is there. I mean, this is of paramount importance, and I think this is being tackled.
So Dr. Kulshrestha, apart from this, what are the other preventive measures that can be taken up to combat droughts?
Well, these can be both structural and non-structural. Say, for example, one of the problems is that you provide the grain, the water particularly, because water is there, and now storage, small little watershed areas that is being done in the generally drought-prone area. The water that comes in the monsoon and then flows away, you see, that can be stored. Anna Hazare's famous thing in the Sukhuma, in the Ralegaon Siddhi, there's a famous thing. There are other success stories in the country, the Pani Panchayat and all that have been done. That is conserving the water. That's the main thing. Then some sort of a vegetation cover that will attract the dew and that will have something. So forestation is another thing. So all the Aravalis there is effort going on to sort of grow something on that, seed it and all that type of thing. So those are the main things. That is the conserve the water, number one. Number two, whatever water is there available, use it judiciously, and wherever there is a drought, provide the help, particularly cattle, fodder banks are opened, cattle sheds are opened, cattle are taken somewhere else. Then provide the people with the wherewithal to augment their purchasing power which has been depleted. So these are the various arrangements which go on. But I would again like to emphasize the same thing, that we cannot afford to neglect these areas which are supposed to be arid areas of the country, or which are the drought-prone areas which are dependent only on rainfall, because these are very important today and they are going to be very important tomorrow.
So it means that we need to develop inter-institutional response plan.
Something like that. That's already
kind of a thing, because then only it is possible to go it in a coordination.
So
worked out.
Before we end our telecounseling session, first of all, I would like to thank Dr. Kulshrestha for giving us his views on the 4 disasters that we've covered. He's actually given us very good suggestions as well as viewpoints, and I'm sure you must have all learned a lot today. And 2 things which have emerged out of the discussion is, which I am again repeating for you, that first of all, most of the natural disasters are natural and we cannot do anything about it. But like flood and drainage and droughts and famines have also got aggravated due to human activity. And we can do a lot about them through community preparedness plans. And first step in that direction is awareness.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.